Well, we are so happy to be able to present to you this evening Patricia Smith, my new best friend. We were actually born days apart a couple years ago, not many years ago. Patricia has been called, and I love this quote, I'm sure you're sick of hearing it, but it's true, a testament to the power of words to change lives. She's the author of 7 books of poetry, including Incendiary Art, Should Have Been Jimmy Savannah, which won the Lenore Marshall Prize from the Academy of American Poets, Blood Dazzler, a chronicle of the human and environmental cost of Hurricane Katrina, which was nominated for a National Book Award, and Tea House of the Almighty, a 2005 National Poetry Series selection published by Coffee House Press. And she will probably read from a little bit from each. Her work has appeared in multiple poetry magazines, Poetry, Paris Review, The New York Times, Tri-Quarterly, Tin House, Washington Post, and in both Best American Poetry and Best American Essays. Her contribution to crime fiction anthology, Staten Island Noir, which she edited, won the Richard L. Fish Award from the Mystery Writers of America for the best debut story of the year, and was chosen for Best American Mystery Stories 2013. Lots of superlatives in your bio. She was a 2014 Guggenheim Fellow, a 2012 Fellow at both MacDowell and Yaddo, and a 2-time Pushcart Prize winner. She's been working on a volume of poetry combining text and 19th century African American photos, and a collaborative novel with her husband, Bruce Da Silva, who's with us this evening. Welcome to you as well. She worked on this book, finished this book, the poetry book, at a recent residency, a 6-week fellowship at Civitella Ranieri in Umbria, which is where we met. And became best friends. So, welcome, and we look forward to hearing your work. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I can't believe you guys go to school here. Okay, I went to a school where English wasn't elective, so this is hilarious. I hope, but you're so thrilled, aren't you? You're not taking advantage of it yet? You're used to it? You're just like, no? Okay. No, she's like, I am not used to this. I will never be used to this. This is amazing. Thank you, new best friend. Love you so much. I am thrilled that this was able to work out and I was able to be here. I start a lot of my readings out with the same poem, and I did it for years and years, and eventually I had to ask myself, why this poem? I had gone to one of the first trips I took as a poet. I was invited to read for some 6th graders in Dade County, Miami, and I went barreling there and said, hey, I'm here to read you poetry, but the area that I was in had a high incidence of drug use, so a lot of the kids had lost parents or brothers or sisters to drug addiction and AIDS, and there was a little girl there named Nicole, and her mother had died of an overdose the week before, and she was already back in school. And so I think I wrote this poem, which features a lot of those kids, because it reminds me of the power that language has to move you from one place in your head to a safer place, because she was asking me to help her write a poem about her mother. So this is dedicated to the 6th grade class at Lily C. Evans Elementary School in Dade County, Miami, which they've made me promise to say every time. And the first time it's been said in Europe. This is great. I am astonished at their mouthful names. Lacanicia, Chevalane, DeLeo, Fumaleo. Their ragged rebellions and lip gloss pouts in all those pants drooped as drapery. I rejoice when they kiss my face, whisper wet and urgent in my ear, make me their obsession because I have brought them poetry. They shout me raw, bruise my wrist with their pulling, and brashly claim me as mama as they cradle my head in their little laps, waiting for new words to grow in my mouth. You. Angry, jubilant, weeping poets, we are all saviors, reluctant hosannas in the limelight. But you knew that, didn't you? So let us bless this 6th grade class. 40 cracking voices, 40 nappy heads, and all of them raise their hands when I ask. They have all seen the Reaper, grim in his heavy robe, pushing the button for the Dead Project elevator, begging for a break at the corner pawn shop, cackling wildly in the back pew of the Baptist church. I asked the death question, and 40 fists punched the air. Me! And O'Neill, matchstick crackchild, watched his mother's body become a claw. And 9-year-old Tico Jefferson, barely big enough to lift the gun, fired a bullet into his throat when Mama bended his back with a leaden pipe. Tamika cried into a sofa pillow when Daddy blasted Mama into the north wall of their cluttered one-room apartment. Danya's cousin, gone in a drive-by, dark window, click, 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 gun, says Danya, her tiny finger a barrel, the thumb a hammer. I am astonished at their losses. And yet when I read a poem about my own hard-eyed teenager, Jeffrey asks, is he dead yet? Cannot be comprehended. My 18-year-old still pushing and pulling his own breath. And 40 faces pity me, knowing that I will soon be as they are, numb to our bloodied histories, favoring the Reaper with a thumbs up and a wink, hearing the question and shouting, me, Miss Smith, I know somebody dead. I know somebody dead. Nicole, with her braids kissed with match flame. She says, will you teach me to write a poem about my mama? Her mother had been dead for such a short time. We need to remember the people who, like Nicole, are waiting like vessels to be filled. And they are waiting. And they are waiting. And they wait. Thank you very much. The book Incendiary Art, it's a book of witness. It is a book that I wrote, or at least conceived of writing, wrote a lot of it during Donald Trump's campaign. And there were two things that happened, and the one that I think sparked the most poetry is after one of his rallies. They were interviewing a man who said, I sure would love to burn a black man alive. And another thing at the time, there were a lot of young men losing their lives at the hands of the police. And my job, as I see it, is to listen for the voices that I'm not hearing. And one of the voices I wasn't hearing was voices of the mothers of these people. You know, at the beginning of the event, you would see the mother in the midst of the chaos after they tell her what happened, and then you'd see her again at the end when the person who was responsible for her child's death was deemed not responsible. And in between that and afterwards, they disappear. So that was sort of the cornerstone of the book. And I wanted to read you first. This is in the voice of the mother. It's called Saga of the Accidental Saint. I don't expect you'll recognize my voice. I don't believe this saga I've suppressed will ever sound familiar. I am just a stooped and accidental saint, no choice except to strain the limits of my throat. I am the mama weep beneath the fold, the paragraph you skip, the wink of gold inside a rotted mouth, that shredding note of grief. Excuse what's inexcusable in me, the shifting wildfire-tinted weave, my ankles blue with fluid, how I grieve in gospel you can't clutch, a fusible display of double negatives I spew whenever someone says my child is gone and then goes on to pile the blame upon my child for being gone. Or maybe you believe the wretched mess is rightly traced right back to me, whose body housed the crime. My daughter out of dollars, out of time, my son just seeking ways to be erased. So many ways they stride into the line of gunfire, tease the trigger, crave the shot, just living though their days as if they're not about to die. He totes a paper bag of wine, or tussles laughing with his kid, or rolls a joint, or asks his boo to braid his hair while lazing on the stoop, or dares to glare when someone shoves. She fights against the holes around her throat, or someone looks the same as someone else, or sits inside her car or someone else's car, or leaves ajar a door she should have closed. He plays a game of hoops to clear his head, or doesn't raise his hands, or raises them, or doesn't stop, or does, or when commanded, fails to drop his wallet, keys, or phone. He sets ablaze a heap of trash, somebody's car or store, while shouting slogans meant to make you care that he's alive. She's killed if she's not there, although she said she'd be, or there before she should have been, or on her way to work, or coming home not walking like she should, not walking down the street she normally would. He walks too close behind. You have to jerk your purse out of the way. You palm the mace. He passes, spitting lyric, vile and blue, not giving damns that he's offending you. All you can remember is his race. You ask him to succumb. He dares decline. The situation quickly falls apart. A weapon's raised to line up with his heart because he feels entitled to his spine. She fumbles in her pocket for some change or jumps the A-train turnstile on a dare. She mumbles like her mind is not all there or titters in a way you think is strange. He wrecks his Chevy, waves for help. He calls the 9, the 1. He's waiting wrong. The folks around him said he didn't belong. He coughs or sneezes, looks away. He brawls with brothers, sisters, father, wife. He waves a Walmart toy, or he can't find his place in line. He laughs too loud. He can't retrace his steps. He droops his pants. He misbehaves. She turns her back or whirls around, or could be packing, could be wanted, could be strong enough to snap your neck. She moves all wrong. He wanders into someone else's hood in colors that he struggles to explain. He prances, strides, he's plotting an escape. He stops and spins on you. He's here to rape your daughter. Or he scoffs when you complain about his smell. He crafts a sign. He parks behind your Chevy, thrusts his massive fist into or through the air. He wakes up pissed but right on time, then smokes a blunt or arcs his brow when someone asks, "You good?" He waits his turn or takes a break. He takes a leak. He frightens everyone with his physique. The situation's bound to escalate. So many ways they're asking not to be. She's wearing out her welcome, being black when no one asked her to. You've seen her lack of grace, the space she occupies, her glee when chicken, weed, or welfare checks roll in. He goes to class. He graduates. He takes the seat right next to you. His shoulder makes you quake inside. You simply don't know when he'll blow. She shops beneath the winking eye of video, but then pays with a card that can't be hers. His chest and arms are scarred with scrape and blood tattoos, so why untie the noose shaped like his neck? His clothes are blue or red. He wants your job. He scoped your wife. He craves your home, your cash, your perfect life. That textbook in his hands, not fooling you. She hawks and spits. She begs for change. She blows a harp. She blows through blow. She blows her chance, a victim yet again of circumstance. He's fighting back, but everybody knows that he's too coarse, too dumb, too street, too black, too dense, too doomed, too thick, too much of those, too vicious pose, too quick to come to blows, too likely he could spark your heart attack. He flares his nostrils, hides his hands. He flees without explaining why. She lifts, she steals, she swipes, she grabs, she snatches, cuts a deal. He stumbles, trips, he trips a wire. He sees too much, she needs too much. He feels too much, her skin's too mud, his skin's too light. He fights too dirty, fights for breath. The savage nights are huge with him, the voodoo in his touch. He shoots himself while handcuffed to a pole, or hangs himself while hanging from a tree, or wrings his neck although his hands aren't free. He always seems to fail at self-control. He's monster, ogre. He's the looming threat, insisting he didn't do that thing he did, denying that she'd hidden what she hid, confusing you by getting so upset. He claims he's innocent. He files a case. He lives too large, too long. He must believe that he is white or free. He's so naive. With every step he takes, he falls from grace. He steps inside or out or through or down. She bellows, jumps or hisses, struts or spins. He stalks a street, steps off a curb. His sin should be enough to drive him out of town, where he'd be out of sight and out of mind and out of bounds, but thankfully not out of range. And if you think he's all about the kill, the drops, the guns, and gangster grind, you know for sure as soon as you see me, his mama, grieving ugly, wailing about, my child, and plucking Jesus out of every bag. You just can't see why he deserves such stupid grace. My wailing thrust, each Lord have mercy on my baby's soul, my sad theatrics as my child goes cold. And then the hungry cameras readjust my howls until it's not my child who's dead, but something feral, edged in leek, a threat to shrubbery and Sundays. While he's wet and seeping into street, they frame his head and mine inside a single shot and ask my nappy hair and bulging eyes just what I think. I keen, implode on cue. They cut the camera back to frame the blooded mask and splay. You don't remember what I say or hear his name, but you are borderline obsessed with my collapse, my crumpled wine and holy ghosted flail, the matinee of mama. You are entertained until you aren't. And then I'm just an open maw, a blur and tongue. You shouldn't waste your awe on my unleashed display of overkill. Ignore the blackish bruiser, dripping bile, the spittle spewing me, still bellowing, my Lord, why would you let this thing disrupt your day? I disappear, and while I'm relegated to an anecdote on way to nothing, all you can recall is sputtered gospel and caterwaul, the corpse, the tightened wire around my throat. That's my son collapsed there. My son crumpled there, my son lying there, my daughter positioned there, my daughter repositioned there, my daughter as exhibit A there, my daughter dumped over there, my son hidden away there, my son blue there, my son dangling there, my son caged there, my daughter on the gurney there, on the slab there, in the drawer, my daughter there, splayed there, my son locked down there, my son hanging there, my son bleeding out there, my son growing frigid there, my daughter deposited there, my son inside the chalk there, my daughter being bagged there, my son on the slab there, my son crushed there, my son rearranged there, my son crumpled in the door there, my daughter's neck shrinking in the noose there, my son's left eye over there, my son as exhibit B there, my son behind the wheel there, my son under the wheels there, my son slumped over the wheel there, my son, my daughter, blooded and not moving, in the doorway, on the stoop, down the block in front of her kids, just inside the barbershop, face down in the street, outside the bodega, inside the bodega, in the back alley behind the bodega, on the videotape a block from home, leaving home, hanging out at home, in the schoolyard, on the blacktop, in his bed, in her kitchen, in my arms, in my arms, in my arms. That's my son, shot to look thug. That's my daughter, shot to look more animal, shot as kill, shot as prey, shot as conquest, shot as solution, shot as lesson, shot as warning, shot as comeback, shot as payback, shot for sport, shot for history. That's my son not being alive anymore there. That's my child coming to rest one layer below the surface of the rest of my life there. The other part of this is there are a number of cases that I wanted to look at from a mother's point of view, and I'll read a few of those. March 3rd, 2014, Iberia Parish, Louisiana. Police say that Victor White III, 22, shot himself while handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser. November 19th, 2013, Durham, North Carolina. Police say that Jesus Huerta, 17, shot himself while handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser. July 29, 2012, Jonesboro, Arkansas. Police say that Chavis Carter, 21, shot himself while handcuffed in the back of a police cruiser. He reached back and found his own hands with his own hands, worked his bound fingers to set his free fingers loose, then used that shackled hand to free the other shackled hand, and the freed shackled hand, still shackled, was bound to the other hand once both were free. Once free in the shackled hands turned to the matter of the gun, which couldn't be there because they'd searched my baby twice, and a gun is a pretty big thing unless it isn't, unless it is dreamed alive by hands that believe they are no longer shackled. Stunned in cuffs, but free and searching, the left and right hands found a gun with a stink like voodoo, a gun that couldn't have been there, wasn't there, but was. The left-handed him used a cuffed hand, which could have either been left or right, since both were free, to root around for a trigger and fire a bullet right into his left-handed head, impossible but not really, since the preferred killing hand may have preferred its shackles. The policeman, who had searched my baby twice and cuffed both his free and unfree hands behind his back before his hands found his own hands and pulled, heard no human sound at all during all that frantic magic. No fuck as my boy struggled to get his left shackled hand to do what his right shackled hand wouldn't do. No frenzied pound of one bracing foot against the door. No grunt or whoop of glee to mark all those times he slipped out of custody and in again. But they did hear the bang of the gun that wasn't there, just when it sent that bullet into the right side of his left-handed head. Sounds like sacrifice, they thought. Slumped, eyes cocked and undone, my child was amazed at the sweet hoodoo he had managed. Both left and right hands were shackled and free behind him. There was an eerie, perfect circle of smoke in his hair. Suicide, they both said, at the very same time. And since it was odd how they had reached the same conclusion, they smiled and shook their heads. Noting the shackles, they praised their God in the light of miracle, while the boy who couldn't have done what he did, but did, bled down to nothing. Guess he couldn't take it, one of the alive said to the other. He didn't mean wearing the shackles. He meant not wearing them. All right. March 12, 2012, Pasadena, California. Kendrick McDade, 19, was chased and shot 7 times by 2 police officers after a 911 caller falsely reported being robbed at gunpoint by 2 black men. McDade's final words were, "Why did they shoot me?" Because walk, because upright, because Africa, because decision, because Tuesday, because loaded gun, because running, because 2 black, because 2 black, because identified, because uniform, because breathless, because unable, because America, because yo mama, because Mississippi, because uniform, because Obama, because the chase, because unarmed, because convenient, because mistaken, because threatened, because ritual, because no one will miss you, because beast, because innocent, because they could, because they could, because they could, because they could, because they... I usually give my boys names anybody can remember. Scapegoat, Target, Perp Walk. The name Kendrick so squashed his potential, he should have been victim, identify, bullseye, miracle. How about accident? Perfect. I never had children. I just had accidents. September 14, 2013, Bradfield Farms, North Carolina. After being involved in a traffic accident, Jonathan Farrell, 24, knocked on the door of a nearby house for help. The woman inside called the police. They arrived and shot him 10 times. My son said, "I just had an accident. I need to use a phone." She said, "You're black." My son said, "It'll only take a minute. I need to call the police." She heard, "Call the police." My son said, I know it's late, but I just had an accident." She said, 911. He said, "Okay then, you'll call 911? She said, "You're black." The police said, "Is he black?" She said, "He's black." When the gun arrived, it said, "I just had an accident." The gun 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 said, "I just had." Now for something completely different. That's okay. Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, I'm pulling totally out of that. It's funny, I'm reminded of a reading I did once. I like to get to my readings kind of early so I can watch the crowd come in and look. And at one point I'd come in and it was kind of late and I had to get right up on stage and I started reading. And unfortunately, I don't really write that much when I'm happy. I started reading poems, and about halfway through, people's shoulders were slumped and they were looping nooses around their necks, and running out into traffic. And then they call it my suicide reading, because I was just reading and I was like, okay, now this poem, that poem, and it was all such doom and gloom. When I'm happy, I'm out being happy. When I'm mad or sad, it's like, where's my keyboard? Okay. All right, I'll do this one. I think my best friend heard this one, but it's the only thing that's going to pull me out of this. So one of the first times that I went to Europe to read poetry, I'm from the west side of Chicago. I'm like from the part of town they tell you to stay away from. I'm not even supposed to be here. I don't even know I'm here today. It's like, it's like somewhere someone's going, how did she get in there? You know how when Americans go somewhere they've never been before, they try to act like they've already been there? The first time you went to a museum, you're like, that must be Monet, I believe. And people are like, no, you don't know what you're talking about, shut up. But it's like, and you forget that there's this real art of discovery. Like, it's okay not to know stuff. So the first time we went to Paris, I was with my Mexican girlfriend, and I don't know how they let us in. We got through the doors, and we were running up and down the halls, and we would just like imagine there's a velvet rope here. We would go like, yeah, we're touching the art, Oh, and it just got worse than that. So it was the day that, they stayed open really late. And at the end of the day, like nobody told us because we were American, so we didn't have to leave. So we're walking up down the halls, and I swear, they were on their walkie-talkies going, okay, Negro and Mexican, Hall 52, trying to touch the Mona Lisa. Yeah. So it's just, I was trying to remember what it was like, just that sense of discovery, before we tried to act like we knew everything. So anyway, this is called Doing the Louvre. This is dedicated to my friend, Patricia Smith, and I say her name because I think they're probably still looking for us. Oh, we were with her husband, but he was a real deadhead, so. After we dumped her husband in the Louvre's cafe to sip the steaming tea and chew on his poetry, we're off like schoolgirls, screeching in duet, dazzled by the bright, eternal gasp of ancient things. We've got no business here, homegirl and compañera. We've got no business closing our mouths around this sharp, exquisite language or savoring the sweet tongue squeeze of pastries, shining cakes, and shaved chocolates. We're of simpler stock, city and country dust, collard greens, moon pies, bullet holes, and basement slow dances. We are shamelessly American, rough street girls with rusty knees, the flip side of cocky Parisian wisp, and slim cashmere coats the color of tobacco. Girlfriend, you and I are too much scream for this place, but you're a junkie just like I am. Too long denied access to official beauty, we walk these halls with our mouths open and faces tilted up, swallowing everything, swallowing it all, much too much scenery and sound for our thin American throats. We gawk at cathedrals with their gargoyles bleached to an eerie snarl by bright slashes of moon. Say goodbye, we mean yes. Good morning, we mean how much. As for bread, we need the toilet. We are amazed that no one is asking for all of this back, that we are allowed to bask in this city's light. I can still hear my mama, as plain and practical as a cast iron skillet. Child, you need to stop all that foolishness over there in some France where you don't know nothing or nobody. Ain't no black folks over there nohow. But I know you, old friend, with your bright burnished tangle of hair and deep laugh, and right now these halls belong to us. There are bad girls loose in the Louvre. Girls soft as gunshots, girls nourished and fueled by silvers, silks, and the stone gaze of Napoleon. We laugh at the smashed noses of Egyptian rulers, stare at the tiny mummified feet of a young girl, mistake Goya for Gauguin, and rub what surfaces we can, including the marble cocks of towering deities. Can I say that? Okay. Including the marble cocks of towering deities. When we say things like, hey, I think I saw that on a postcard once, or, do you know how old this thing is? How can the world help but love us? We would give Venus our arms. After 8 hours, clicking our heels and snapping illicit flash photos in dark halls brimming with ancient music, we finally find the Mona Lisa. Alone. Caged and antiseptic behind that glass every woman wears. And we wonder how best to free her, knowing she's a junkie just like we are. She longs for our wild voices, our naive and accidental beauty. She's aching to ditch that frame and skip these hallowed halls with the homegirls, mistake the obscene for the exquisite, and gaze at unsolved mysteries that just for once are not her own. That's it. Thank you. Wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you. How, time, there's time exists. But I know you well enough. There'll be like a little hook. Do you want the question and answers after? You guys want to ask questions? She's like, we ain't trying to know you like that. One good. Okay, one good long one. Did you really just say no? Did she really say just give them one good long? Okay. God, I'm trying to figure out what to read. Oh, no, I'll mess that one up. I know I'll mess that one up. Oh, I'll mess it up. See, this book is all bad, not bad news, but this book is really heavy. And so now that I've seen all smiles on all your faces, I'm trying to keep you smiling. And how will you do that, Patricia? Oh, no, okay. I am going to, I'm going to close my eyes and see. Don't you hate when readers do this? Close my eyes and see if I can remember the first few lines of this poem. I can remember the first few, I might get all the way through. Wow. No, that's not going to work. Because I got to the third line and there was like a big black hole that is like where the line should be, and I went, Okay, I will read you a poem about, this book is called Should Have Been Jimmy Savannah. It's called Should Have Been Jimmy Savannah because my mother once, I was having a discussion with my mother, which didn't happen very often, and she said, do you know what your father wanted to name you when you were born? And I said, what? And she said, Jimmy Savannah, which would have been the world's most kick-ass poet name, right? Jimmy, it's like name, It'd be like James Bond, it'd be Jimmy Savannah. Right? So instead, my mother went with the incredibly boring and functional Patricia Ann. Like there's no more Patricia Anns in this world, right? What? Oh, and Smith, too. My last name is Smith. So I'm John Smith's little sister right here. But this is, anyway, that should have been Jimmy Savannah. My mother scraped the name Patricia Ann from the ruins of her discarded Delta, thinking it would offer me shield and shelter, that leering men would skulk away at the slap of it. Her hands on the hips of Alabama, she went for flat and functional, then siphoned each syllable of drama, repeatedly crushing it with her broad, practical tongue until it sounded like an instruction to God and not a name. She wanted a child of pressed head and knocking knees, a trip up in the double Dutch swing, a starched pinafore and peppermint in the sour pickle kind of child, stiff-laced and unshakably fixed on salvation. Her Patricia Ann would never idly throat the Lord's name or wear one of those thin, sparkly skirts that flirted with her knees. She'd be a nurse or third-grade teacher or postal drone, jobs requiring alarm clock discipline and sensible shoes. My 4 downbeats were music enough for a vapid life of butcher shop sawdust and fatback as cuisine, for raids spritzed into the writhing pockets of a Murphy bed. No crinkled consonants or muted hiss would summon me. My daddy detested borders. One look at my mother's watery belly, and he insisted, as much as he could insist with her, on the name Jimmy Savannah, seeking to bless me with the blues-bathed moniker of a ball breaker, the name of a grown gal in a snug red dress and unlaced all-stars. He wanted to shoot muscle through whatever I was called, arm each syllable with tiny weapons so no one could mistake me for anything other than a tricky whisperer with a switchblade in my shoe. I was bound to be all legs, a bladed debutante hooked on Lucky Strikes and sugar. When I sent up prayers, God's boy would giggle and consider. Daddy didn't want me to be anybody's surefire factory, nobody's callback or seized rhythm, so he conjured a name so odd and hot, even a boy could claim it. And yes, he was prepared for the look my mother gave him when he first mouthed his choice, the look that said, "That's it, you done lost your goddamn mind." She did that thing she does where she grows 2 full inches with righteous. And he decided to just whisper, "Love you, Jimmy Savannah," whenever we were alone, rechristening me the seed of Otis, conjuring his own religion and naming it me. Thank you. What? That wasn't long enough? One more. You guys okay? One more. Oh, this one's long enough. Speaking of my mother. Okay, yeah, I think I will with this. Okay, so I think a lot about language, and what were we talking about? Oh, there was a fellow at Civitella, Dillick, who was talking about the theft of language. And my mother and father both came up from the South during the Great Migration. And it was my mother came from Alabama, my father from Arkansas. And there was one day that my mother came to me and she was getting dressed. And I said, "Where are you going?" And she said, "I'm going for my English. I signed up for English lessons." And I said, "You speak English?" And she said, "I don't speak English right." And some enterprising little company had set up a thing in downtown Chicago to teach Southerners how to speak English correctly. So this is a poem called Thief of Tongues, and I'll finish with this one, and maybe we will take some questions and party down, like they say in Florence. Thief of Tongues. 1. My mother is learning English. pulling rubbery cinnamon-tinged hose to a roll beneath her knees, sporting one swirling Baptist ski slope of a hat. She rides the rattling elevator to a windy city spire and pulls back her gulp as the elevator hurtles to heaven. Then she's stiffly seated at a scarred oak table across from a white, government-sanctioned savior who has dedicated 8 hours a week to straightening afflicted black tongues. She guides my mother patiently through lazy ings and ers, slowly scraping her throat clean of the moist and raging infection of Aliceville, Alabama. There are barely muttered apologies for colored sounds. There is much beginning again. I want to talk right before I die. Want to stop saying ain't and I done been like I ain't got no sense. I'm a grown woman. I didn't live too long to be this stupid, acting like I just got off the boat. My mother has never been on a boat. But 50 years ago, merely a million of her, clutching strapped cases, Jet's Emmett Till issue, and thick-peppered chicken wings in waxed bags, stepped off hot rumbling buses at northern stations in Detroit, in Philly, in the bricked cornfield of Chicago. Brushing stubborn scarlet dust from their shoes, they said, "We're north now," slinging it in backdoor syllable as if those 3 words were vessels big enough to hold country folks' overwrought idea of light. 2. Back then, my mother thought it a modern miracle, this new living in a box stacked upon other boxes, where every flat surface reeked of Lysol and effort, and chubby roaches, cross-eyed with raid, dragged themselves across freshly washed dishes and dropped dizzy from the ceiling into our Murphy beds, our wash tubs, our open steaming pots of collards. Of course, there was a factory just 2 bus rides close, a job that didn't involve white babies or blue laundry, where she worked in tense line with other dreamers, repeatedly, all those oily, hot-combed heads drooping, no talking as scarred brown hands romanced machines, just the sound of doing it right and juicy fruit cracking. A mere mindset away, there had to be a corner tavern where dead bluesmen begged second chances from the jukebox, and where my mama, perched man-weary on a comfortable stool by the door, could look like a Christian who was just leaving. And on Sunday, at Pilgrim Rest Missionary Baptist Church, she would pull on the pure white gloves of service and wail to the rafters when the Holy Ghost's hot hand grew itchy and insistent at the small of her back. She was his child, finally loosed of that damnable delta, building herself anew in this land of sidewalks, blue jukes, and sizzling fried perch in virgin white boxes. See her, all nap burned from her crown, a gold tooth winking, soft hair riding her lip, blouses starched hard, Orlan sweaters with smatterings of stitched roses, A-line skirts the color of unleashed winter. 3. My mother's voice is like homemade cornbread, slathered with butter, full of places for heat to hide. When she is pissed, it punches straight out and clears the room. When she is scared, it turns practical, matter of fact, like when she called to say, "They found your daddy this morning. Somebody shot him. He dead. He ain't come to work this morning. I know something was wrong." When Mama talks, the southern swing of it is wild with unexpected blooms, like the fields she never told me about in Alabama. Her rap is peppered with ain't gots and I done beens and he bees, just like mine is when I'm color among color. During worship, when talk becomes song, her voice collapses and loses all acquaintance with key, so of course, it's my mother's fractured alto wailing above everybody, uncaged, unapologetic, and creaking toward heaven. Now she wants to sound proper when she gets there. A woman got some sense in future need to upright herself, talk English instead of talking wrong. It's strange to hear the precise rote of Annie Pearl's new mouth. She slips sometimes, but is proud when she remembers to bite down on dirt-crafted contractions and double negatives. Sometimes I wonder whatever happened to the warm expanse of the red dust woman who arrived with a little sin and all the good wrong words. I dream her breathless, maybe leaning forward a little in her seat on the Greyhound. I ain't never seen, she begins, grinning through the grime at Chicago, city of huge shoulders, thief of tongues. Thank you very much. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Does anyone have any questions at all? Yes.
Thanks. Hey. I was just curious as to what your kind of, not to sound cheesy and corny, but like your journey as a poet has been throughout your life, if this is something that you have had a passion for since you were really young, or if it's a newer, not newer, but something that you grew into type of
Yeah. My father, who I write about a lot, actually, when he moved up from the South, he brought with him something I like to call the tradition of the back porch. The end of every day, he would sit down and he'd tell me these great stories. Both my mother and father worked at a candy factory. Remember, guys know the melted milk balls? I thank you. My mother and father worked in that factory all their life, so he would tell me about all these little sordid goings on at the candy factory, and sometimes I would go down there and he would point the people out. That's the one who's having an affair with that one's wife, And so he would tell me these great things, and so every evening I was like, okay, so what happened to Joe? Did his wife find out? And so what he was doing, though, he was teaching me that there were other ways to look at the world beside what I was or was not learning in school. That the world was kind of felt like this churning narrative that always came from somewhere and was always going somewhere. And every once in a while you just go, ooh, that's good. Ooh, and there's your stories, And I just knew that I wasn't thinking poetry in particular. I just thought, how magical is it that you wake up every day and the canvas is clear and you can fill it with stories that you want to fill it with, And I love that the anticipation I had from my father's stories. I really wanted to make people feel that way. So I thought maybe I just need to tell stories like my dad or whatever. And then you figure there's newspapers, there's poetry. But what I was learning from poetry, I swear, where I went to school, I was expected to fail. Okay, the entire community was expected to fail. So the teachers at that point did not put much work into it. So they'd say, okay, today we're going to study poetry. And I mean, today we're going to study poetry. And there was Robert Frost with his ass in the woods again. And, and then we'd read that, and they'd say, and that was poetry, and we'd go on to something else. So I just never figured. So later in my life, I was in Chicago, and there was this really vibrant literary community in Chicago that I didn't really know anything about. And it was a place called the Green Mill. And at the Green Mill, they had a thing called the Poetry Slam. And a friend of mine said, there's so much going on, I'm going to take you around to all these places. And that was one of the places. And I can tell you the exact moment when I thought, oh my God, this is where I could tell stories. There's a woman who was... You could come and read in the open mic, and that was fine. And then they had a featured poet, so you got to listen to somebody's body of work for half an hour, 40 minutes. And then they had the slam, which is, you guys know the Poetry Slam, right? It's a poetry competition. And the competition is either you want to do it or you don't. And I discovered that I was really competitive. I didn't know I was. So there was a woman who was a champion there at that time called her name was Lisa Biscani. She had a poem which was in the voice of the barber who cut the hair of people who were going into the gas chamber, where he knew where they were going, but they didn't. And when she finished that poem, and it was a persona poem, she finished it, and there was this white-hot moment of silence in the room. People didn't know, I can't applaud, I can't, And I looked at that, and I said, that's, when I bring down what my father was doing, that's a different kind of story, but it's that same feeling, you know. So that's that got me attracted to that. And for years, I was in the poetry slam community. All I cared about was where's the next audience. We were all telling stories to each other. My social circle built up around that. The people I trust to this day are people that I was moving. So I came from getting up on stage and doing it. And then later on, after I realized that people were looking at us and saying, well, that's not really poetry. All you're doing is pushing buttons. Like we weren't really crafting our work, that we were just spitting it out and it didn't, you know. And so I then thought, I want to see the muscle and bone of what I'm doing. I want to know more about the canon. I want to know not only who the important poets are, but who they were influenced by, and you know, and who was influenced by them. And so that's when I really started to kind of study. So right now, I think because of that performance background, I feel like I'm at the perfect juncture for a storyteller to be. I really really work hard at crafting my poetry, but I delight in speaking it and telling it. Like, oh, something happened to me, I got this story for you. You know, that's why, as you can see, I'm not very formal behind the mic. I'm like, oh, what am I going to read? You know, it's because I don't know you, but I'm learning little bits from looking at you when I'm doing the poetry, and I'm thinking, oh, I think they'd like that, or they'd like that, or she needs to hear that story, or she looks like she, you know. So that's what keeps it exciting for me. So it went from the performing thing to a little bit deeper into the canon, but also I maintain my excitement about it because it's you and I, and there's a tunnel of energy from me to you, and I know for a fact you have a story to tell me. I know that. I'm not doing anything that any of you can't do. It's just that you're listening to my stories now, and when we all go to the club later, I'll listen to your stories. They're like, club, Florence, club, where are we? See, they got the clip. They're like, oh, is she coming to the club tonight? Really? Oh, okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure. Anybody else?
Hi. So thank you for everything that
No
you
problem
shared
at
with
all.
us. When you're writing spoken word poetry or slam poetry and page poetry, is there a difference in your approach and the language that you use, or do you kind of make it the same and choose?
Not anymore. When I was doing a lot of performing, all I cared about was getting it on a page so I could read it and eventually internalize it and memorize it. So if you had picked up a page of mine at that time, it would have looked like a big block of prose. Line breaks be damned. It's like I'm at the end of a page. I wasn't worried about the structure because I wasn't thinking publication. Nobody else was going to see it, you know. And so there's more, when I was writing more for spoken word, there was a lot more scene setting. There was a lot more, here's where this poem is taking place type thing, you know, because you don't have it in your hand. You're not going to have it in your hand, and you can't look at it later to say, so it has to be more immediate. I can't use really tangled, you know, I can't get too thick with the progression of the poem because I don't want you stuck on a line while I'm still going, you know, and having to catch up with me. One of the hardest things for me was realizing that I wasn't really giving anything up when I studied poetry more deeply, that I could still do that and not do all of that throat clearing and things like that. So right now, and I haven't slammed in years and years, although I do participate with a lot. Some of you might know about Urban Word in New York, Young Chicago Authors. I work a lot with them, you know, and they're perfect because they do the spoken word thing, but they also are studying the craft in tandem. So a lot of the poems you hear now, I have an argument with spoken word now in a way. Don't stop screeching at me, please. You know, and it's got this, and you're like, oh, no. And you don't remember the poem, you just remember the screaming, you know? And so a lot of that, I'm kind of working to get rid of a lot of that. But I don't sit down now and say I'm writing this to perform and I'm writing this for the page. I don't make that distinction anymore. I used to, but the more I studied poetry, the more I realized I didn't have to do that anymore.
Thank you for coming to speak to us today.
Thank you.
You tell a lot of stories from the perspective of others, and I'd love to know where you get the voice from to represent them and their lives and what they've been going through.
Oh, where I get the voice from. See, when I talk about being a storyteller, a really important part of that is that I see myself as a witness, you know? So, and I'll tell you a little bit of a story that may help. The book that I have out that's about It's called Blood Dazzler. It's a book of poems about Hurricane Katrina. I am not from the Gulf region. I have no relatives in the Gulf region. And what sparked the book, there was the story about the 34 nursing home residents who died in St. Bernard Parish. So I saw that, and I had an aunt who died in a nursing home. And I just remembered that when I was charged with her care, there was a little yellow button on the side of the bed. When you needed someone, you pressed that button, someone came. So when I saw that story, I flashed back and I thought, all I could picture were these people pressing buttons and no one coming. So that had nothing to do with the Gulf region. It had, it was a singular experience that I transferred over to this exact same place. But what I did, since tragedy upon tragedy during Katrina, we forgot names and faces and everything. It was just, here's our focus, here's our focus, here's our focus. So I wanted to wind the clock back a little bit and have those 34 people, give them a moment of their voice back. That sounds very godlike. If you're listening to it, it's like, give them a minute of their voice back. Who are you? Well, on the other hand, I can't say that Katrina was just a regional event or an event that belonged just to people in the Gulf region, because we all saw it unfold. And I think we all felt some parallel of that sort of pain in our own lives. So the thing with the mothers, I think two things. One is I have to be the teller of my own story. But I figure I'm not the only one telling that story. There were a lot of friends of mine who were from the Gulf region who were also publishing. So maybe, or not just publishing, but telling their stories to groups. So their work plus my work plus somebody else's and somebody else's makes the whole story. Okay, people are always asking, because I write a lot of persona poems. I have a persona poem in the voice of a skinhead. I don't know anything about skinheads. I ain't got no skinhead friends. No, it was I wrote it a long time ago, and it keeps coming back. It keeps becoming popular again. The question at the heart of all this is whether I have the right to enter other lives, okay? And I have decided for myself that I do, because I look for those stories, and sometimes when the people who can tell the stories don't feel like their voices are legitimate, I'm pushing them along a little bit, and that might not be exactly their story, but maybe someone will read it and either get angry or be inspired to say, let me tell my version of that, or she doesn't know what she's talking about, let me tell my version of that. And I invite being challenged on that, because that's one of my favorite conversations. I get the voices from within myself, and they're not always totally on the mark. And when they're not on the mark, I expect someone to stand up and say, that's not on the mark. And I say, okay, let's write something together then. Or, yeah, you see what I mean? So it's, I fight with that all the time, because you can either call it exploitation or you can call it witnessing. So it's, anyone else?
Hi, thank you for being here.
No problem.
What would you say are the common characteristics that you look for or try to emulate when writing a successful or impactful poem or reading impactful or successful poetry?
Sure. My role model is Gwendolyn Brooks. And what I look for is I look for real driving electric narrative. I don't want the stories to ever just sit still, and I look for a mastery of language, and I don't mean technical poetic stuff, but the fact that if I need a word and I don't see one in a dictionary, I can put two words together and make something new. When I edit for leaping language and sound. I don't want anything I don't want the narrative to sit still, and I don't want the words to sit still on the page. I want there to be, if I'm writing about something you don't want to read about, I want you to have to read it because the language is doing it for you. And if you are approaching something that you really want to, if it's something you don't want to read about, and then you come to it for the language, I want the narrative to grab you. Okay, so the poem has two fists, and I'm trying to kind of punch you in the face with both of them and get you to go to the end and say, I didn't know that story could touch me like that, or I didn't know that story that I didn't care about could be written like that. So it's the double-fisted thing, yeah.
Thank you.
Sure, no problem. Anybody else? Don't be trying to hit me up on Facebook, because I don't know you. That's it? We good? Thank you, guys. This was amazing. Thank you. Thank you.